We could keep this very short. Galway are definitely going to win.
There's a lot of lads down the hospital that'll be getting statues before me, so there is.
Described as a blessing that thought he was Mr. Strange, kind of blessing Patrick.
That national narrative, and does my head in, that we're reliant on Joe Canning. Like, oh my God.
Turkey Burke was in full forward, causing all sorts of problems. Then they were able to bring Badger on for Turkey.
Some might say he did a good job on Conor Whelan. I would say, from my point of view, that he spent half the day assaulting him.
Well, maybe it was arrogance, maybe, or naivety, but we never thought we'd be here after losing an Leinster semi-final. I don't know why I'm smirking. I was only just calming down a small bit now at this point, but we never thought we'd be here. I know Patrick finished up last week's episode when I was listening to it back. I wasn't here last week. He said that we'd be reflecting on a Galway win over Dublin. Jesus, anything but the case, Patrick. It's great to have you back as usual. Just the two of us again. I think we'd have to pay people some serious cash to come on this week and try and analyse that performance at the weekend. I suppose we'll just start nightmare stuff. Really, just from start to finish, supporters been back. It was probably a long, lonely journey home for a lot of them. We were lucky in a sense. Neither of us were up there. Whatever bit of luck we had a small bit in that. But nightmare result, nightmare performance. Very little positives to take from it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, I'd say it's great to be here, Dave, but it really isn't, to be honest. Had to summon up some really courage to come on here this evening. But the consolation for us was, as you say, that we didn't actually have to go and have to drive home after. As I said to a friend of mine there the other day, I said not even the Supermax in Kindergarten could have made that journey home a whole lot more enjoyable. But had thankfully had committed to working from home that day, so when I was asked to go, I wasn't actually able to. But from watching on telly, we saw as much as we needed to. Just right from the get-go, right from minute one, it started to go wrong. Once that 21 was saved, and it never improved thereafter. Watched back the game this morning, and watching it back the second time, knowing what's the outcome and knowing how kind of prepared myself for how bad it's going to be. It actually didn't feel as bad as I thought it would. In terms of, we'll say, that first quarter, Galway actually did a lot of decent hurling, but as we go into it, we're forcing chances and just not playing and not scoring and not attacking like we've seen them do in the league. And there was never as we're going to talk about again, we were crying out for so long, but there was nothing forced about the goals they were creating and scoring in the league, whereas there was a real element of that in the first quarter of the last day. And when they didn't come off, that was giving Dublin a lift all the time. And let's not be, call a spade a spade. Dublin were not exceptional here, or we're not brilliant at all. Like, bad and all as we were, they could never get more than a score or two ahead of us. And the game would have stayed going like that if it stayed going for the rest of the night. Dublin would have stayed that 3 or 4 points ahead. And we wouldn't have gone any further behind us either. Just a very difficult performance to explain and to understand how you can go from doing what they're doing in the league, granted and accepted that the league hasn't been all it's cracked up to be in terms of how different teams approached it. Clearly, Dublin, it meant nothing to Dublin, clearly, from what we've seen. It was all preparation for championship. They were probably in a more settled place than Galway in terms of knowing their squad and their team, whether it was their 20 players as such. And there was consistency to their team really throughout the league, and their team selection. It's an easy enough selection every week for Matty Kenny, whereas probably wasn't quite as easy as Shane O'Neill. Even the team that was named for this week was probably a couple of small surprises in it that we'll get onto again in a while. But it was all about this Leinster Championship for Dublin, and credit to them. They went out the hockey dance room. That should have been the warning sign for Galway, but it didn't feel like that warning was heeded anyhow, based on what we saw on Saturday, and we paid the ultimate price, didn't we?
That's for sure. Look, before we kind of analyse the game, I just kind of wanted to talk to there about the Galway team beforehand. You mentioned there maybe there was 1 or 2 surprises, but by and large, I would have said that, I wouldn't have been too disappointed when the team was named on I think, was it Thursday or Friday night? I'm not 100% sure. Friday was named. I wouldn't have been too disappointed with the lineup. It was pretty much, maybe, we mentioned it here before we came on the show, and we probably thought Evan Ireland had done enough during the league to start. Simple as that. Whether that's for Adrian Toohey, whether that's for Joseph Cooney, whether that's for, like, there's a couple of places he had maybe there's a couple of places he probably had done more of a body of work in the league that he deserved to start over a couple of players. And for him not to start would have been disappointed. And I think that was an error. But on, like, beforehand, when you said it, you'd be thinking, okay, right. Other than that, pretty much the team isn't too bad. We've heard stuff like Sean Loftus was going well in training. Heard the form was pretty good. Obviously, Johnny Cohen wasn't available, so you had basically a straight shootout for your partner for Cathal with David Burke, who was still coming back from injury. And we don't really know, how match fit he is, or whether he has a full 70 minutes in him. So maybe that was the reason for starting Loftus. So on that point, you probably wouldn't have been too disappointed with the starting lineup. So to see the performance and just what we produced, like, it was just very, very disheartening and very, very disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we probably had about 17 or 18 players going for the 15 spots. I mean, you had, obviously the team that started the last, and then you had the David Burke, the Evan Nyland, and the Aidan Hart, and Johnny Cohen as well, if he was fully right, which he obviously must have been, seeing as he wasn't even in the matchday squad. So those were kind of your players you were expecting the starting team to be picked from. And Shane O'Neill went for Shane Cooney, who we probably would have, if we were asked to pick that corner back spot, we probably would have given it Shane Cooney. And then further up, Sean Loftus and Adrian Toohey both got the nod. Not overly controversial calls by any means. I mean, they're all players you'd be expecting to go out and do a job. I mean, they're all Ireland medalists. Adrian obviously started in that final in 17, and they're again in 18. And Loftus and Cooney have plenty of experience in it at this stage as well. So it wasn't a case of a big risk or anything like that starting these players. But I mean, the body of work Evan Nyland had done in the league probably did justify a start. And I mean, it's not to say that he came on and turned the game or lit it up, because he didn't. Like, he scored a good point from play, got a good free, did a couple of other nice things, but he wasn't hugely influential by any means. But that's kind of secondary in terms of the fact that our own opinion is that he probably deserved to start the game. But maybe the way they went out and played the game, they felt that he didn't quite fit into their plans in terms of how they were approaching it. Because I mean, Galway definitely didn't play this game the same way they played a lot of their league games, in terms of that four-man sort of half forward line and two-man inside line. It wasn't as clear and obvious as it has been throughout the league. So what the rationale for changing that was, I'm not so sure. But obviously, in results, I mean, that's not the reason Galway lost the game. It was the attitude and application on the field is what cost Galway the game, and the inaccuracy, obviously, in terms of shooting, and just execution was just way off the pace. And as I say, it cost them dearly for a finish,
And you mentioned something there just before we came on, and I couldn't agree more. I didn't even think Dublin were that good, being honest with you. Like, they're not going to. That Dublin team isn't going to beat Kilkenny on the show and they even produced against Galway. It's hard to see them, maybe even taking another scalp in the championship outside ourselves now at this point. Like, they were effective. They had a nice system. They probably got as much as they can out of their players. But at the end of the day, they're fairly limited, Patrick. Like, it's a limited enough Dublin team. Like, it's like, yeah. I think they had a good performance, and you said it already. And like, Galway, even still, as bad and all as they played, they still had the chances to, to really punch that team, and they could have been out of sight long beforehand. So it's just a probably combination of maybe Galway just had so many poor performances all over the field from key players. Like you think about now, I'm not saying they're desperately poor. Like, I'm not saying, Jesus, like they're 1 out of 10s and whatever, match ratings. But I'm saying like we didn't get the impact we need from key players like Dahi, Pádraig, Joe, Concannon, lads that have developed into leaders over the last how many years, and maybe from Concannon and maybe the last couple of years. But like any other day, in fairness, if you had 1 or 2 off, maybe the other 3 would have picked you up, or the other 4, or wheeling it to get you out of a spot, or there was plenty of other lads there. But we just had so many across the board poor performances. Like, you know, your 5 out of 10 just like didn't seem to be off the pitch of the game, didn't seem to realise that it was a championship game that they were. It wasn't just you could turn up in the league and, you know, it's a standoffish game. Dublin were in Galway spaces. They weren't giving them any pace. They were hassling and harrying them. You know, which was very worrying that so many players, Patrick, like that didn't play to anywhere near the best of their ability on the day.
Yeah, and I mean that's no coincidence. Like, you know, obviously players can have an off day. There'll be a couple of that players in that team. It wouldn't be all the players you listed there because, like, I mean, let's be honest, they did all have off days. They were all struggled in their individual battles and all didn't produce what you expect them to produce. And that kind of leads you to question attitude and mindset heading into the game. I mean, in fairness, Dublin, they had a plan and they executed it brilliantly and they worked back the field, worked savage hard. Like, I mean, you couldn't question anything about Dublin the way they performed on the day, and they took their chances. They were clinical. They put Galway under immense pressure isn't the right word, but a lot more pressure than they've been under in the league, as you would expect, because I mean, we're stepping up from league to championship. That's Dublin aren't, you know, setting a trend by doing that. Like that's what everyone does in championship. That's what you're expected to. There is expected to be a jump from league to championship. And I talked about this with Michael Burney last week. I mean, we were talking Dublin Antrim. We said Antrim couldn't make the step from league to championship. They stayed as they were in the league. And then when Dublin made that step, you see the end result. And an 8-point defeat in the league turns into an 18-point defeat in championship. So the challenge was there for Galway to make the step. All right, they couldn't do it. They didn't have as much time with the ball, and as a result, you know, they weren't able to execute the way they had done in the league. And be it with that being balls into the inside line, or just short stick passes, or just general touch and the basics of the game. Really, they weren't done to a good enough standard whereby they could implement their game plan and obviously get the result we all wanted. So I mean, that's credit to Dublin, credit to their management team for putting a plan in place that could do a job, and that's what it was. And I mean, we were talking last week, and we were saying, and Michael Burney was saying, again, a fellow who would have no bias towards Galway or anything, he's saying that he couldn't see Dublin beating Galway because he said just everything is going to have to go so right for Dublin. And the reality is it didn't. I mean, Owen O'Donnell, probably their most influential player, limped off in the last quarter with what looks like a hamstring tear, and that might rule him out for the rest of the year, which would be a criminal loss, a huge loss for them. I mean, they were in a decent spot before that. Conor Whelan scored the goal. That's a big momentum shift in the game. That should see Galway driving on, turn that 2-point deficit into a 3 or 4 point lead, and driving on the final quarter and winning the game comfortably. Start converting the chances that they've been missing all along. And I mean, again, if you go out and say before the game, Dublin are going to score 118, you say Galway are going to win this game comfortably. And then for us to go out and score 114, and like, it's just hard to fathom. And I mean, you go through a play rate. No, our half-back line struggled, no question about it. But I mean, our full-back line all had decent games. Our goalie had probably nearly his best game, I'd say, in championship for Galway. Just he was dead solid, made an excellent save just before Dublin actually scored the goal. Couldn't say a word there. It wasn't like, you know, Tanny Sutcliffe was a standout performer, in fairness. Donald Burke did a few nice things. Chris Cummy obviously got the goal and was effective enough. But aside from that, there weren't Dublin players that shone out and had real outstanding sort of outings, you know. So I mean, defensively we were fairly sound, without maybe being. And you know, we'll get on to the whole thing in a while as well. But I mean, conceding 118, that's a decent day's work for our defence. And was the other end from there up, that was the problem. And again, just trying to pinpoint what was wrong and why lads didn't click, and why, I mean, there was balls being played into Concannon and he was 7 or 8 yards behind Keane O'Callaghan in the first half, and like, why is that happening? Like, you know, why Concannon has an edge in terms of acceleration, in terms of pace, everything you need to get out to the ball first. If he doesn't win it, that's another story, but at least be in the position to win it. It was just like he was on a totally different wavelength to the lads outside him, you know. So just things like that, and just poor decision making, forcing goals, which I definitely thought they did in the first quarter, and just there was like almost like an arrogance about Galway the way they went about things. I mean, imagine if it was Kilkenny we were playing the last day and Joe Kenny had a 21-yard free after 2 or 3 minutes or whatever it was. I mean, you wouldn't even consider going for a goal, even if it was just Owen Murphy on the line. You wouldn't go for it. You tap it over the bar. You get yourself up and running. And I think probably in some ways Dublin nearly might have taken that a bit personally. Like these lads don't respect us here, and we go out and we'll show them. And my God, they did.
Yeah, that's for sure. And as you said, like for me, it was almost an element of complacency, like as in the players perhaps maybe thought that all they needed to do was turn up. You mentioned on the goals there, like some of them weren't done at all. Like it's just like you had a couple of chances to get the score. We'll touch on that a bit more later on. Like, do you think there's an element we kind of took Dublin for granted a small bit? Because I seem to think we did. Like it's as you mentioned there, like just like that was. We had chances there to get things up and running, to get the scoreboard taken over, to get our noses in front and keep them in front. Like letting Dublin get their noses in front is probably the worst case scenario, because like trying to claw them back, they're going to slow everything down. They're fairly, intelligently well set up team. Like when Galway would get a score, they were capable of going down, they were capable of killing the clock, killing the momentum. I think it was even after Whelan's goal in the second half, I don't think we scored for 6 or 7 minutes afterwards. There wasn't a score for 6 or 7 minutes, and that was between passages, that was between probably our own shooting, Dublin slowing down the clock, using professional game management, and a bit of cop on. Like would you put it down to like I wouldn't. It's hard to know. Like, would you put it down to a management issue that the heads weren't right, or what would you think it on? Because overly, I don't really blame the management too much, to be honest with you. I think at this point we have an experienced crop of players that should be able to, get themselves up for a championship game at the very least. Like I almost felt a small bit sorry for the management team that they were looking on at this, and this was the effort that the players were putting on. And I actually felt even more sorry for the supporters who actually made the journey up for the first game in fucking, how many months, like to see this and the lack of effort. And you don't want to be slating these lads too much either, but like they're an experienced bunch of players. We've come to expect a lot more from them, and they really didn't deliver. Like you'd be similar along my thoughts. Would you, like, is it a management issue, like, or am I just like I don't think it is, to be honest with you.
No, a player is solely responsible for his own mindset going into a game. I mean, you're at the attitude of someone going out onto a field. It's not a collective thing; it's an individual thing. If 14 Galway lads went out with the right attitude and one went out with the wrong attitude, he'd stand out like a sore thumb very quickly, and he'd be taken out of there. But that wasn't the case. In reality, it was kind of everyone just seemed off. For me, that's an individual thing. That's a player thing. I mean, management aren't going to be, as I said, the warning signs were there from last week. Dublin racked up a massive score against an Antrim team full of and who were really targeted that game and felt they had a great chance of taking a scalp there themselves. But Dublin ran riot over them, and put up a huge score, broke 40 points, and bet them 18, as I said already. So I mean, like, the talk for a management having seen that, your talk from the week is, what the challenge that we're going to face here. This is a good side. We have the memories of Parnell Park 2 years ago is there as well. That management team weren't there, but that core group of players were all there. They all experienced it that day. Again, another day where Dublin lost one and that day, no more than we lost Connor Whelan. So it wasn't like things were perfect for Dublin either. But I mean, like, going to Croke Park should have suited Galway. Everything was in their favour on the day, going into the game full of confidence after the league. Had a grand little 3-week break since the last league game, leading to this lovely time frame between one match and another. Not like, in terms of, is it too long without a match? No, it's not. 3 weeks is nothing.
No.
And in terms of, and they're not they didn't go out of camp or anything. They stayed going from the league into this. So I mean, the talk from the week in camp would have been of the challenge that's been faced. This whole, as we get so often in post match and pre match interviews, taking up one game at a time. That's what they would have been talking about. Of course, in training, like, you couldn't overlook Dublin based on both what had happened last time we met and what Dublin had done up to now. So for me, that was a player, an individual thing for players, but obviously it was something that seeped across pretty much the whole squad. And yeah, as I say, I mean, if you go out, once you have that mindset, you can't flick a switch and turn it on definitely not against a team that are as capable and as well drilled and set up as Dublin. And Galway weren't able to flick that switch, despite always being in the game, as we've always said, and having the opportunities and having the moments go their way where they possibly could have turned it. They just weren't capable of it because it had gone too far in terms of where they were at mentally and that, and they just couldn't turn it on.
Yeah, and like just some of the basic mistakes, like just the poor shooting, getting blocked down. Like I found a lot of it, like the passing and even short passing that were attempted and getting blocked down. A lot of it was a bit of laziness and just not being up to the tempo of the game. I thought a small bit of it was not to take it on that extra yard to make that yard of room. It was kind of lazy swing or use the possession. I thought another thing, just some of the balls into attack, like I thought, frankly, some of them were appalling. I think we gave away in the first half alone. I think we gave away 3 very handy, or maybe even the first quarter. But I think we gave away 3 very handy points. I know Cahill came out with a ball, terrible distribution forward. Shane Cooney had something similar. Now Shane Cooney had a good game, I must say. He was one of Galway's better players, and Sean Loftus was turned over in midfield as well. And that was 3 points. That were the kind of needless points where we always should be on the front foot, and 3 players that you'd expect good distribution coming in. But it was just they weren't quite there for some reason. And you mentioned it there a few seconds ago as well. It never looked like we were going to come back. Like when we fell behind, we're always playing catch up. And even when we got the goal, I'm thinking, geez, even when we got to halftime, I'm thinking, I just don't see how we can come back here. I thought it just never looked like the case. And like, despite us pulling back 2 incredible comebacks against Waterford and Cork in the league, it just didn't seem that we're hurling at the same tempo, even as those games in the league, to be able to bring it back. Like we were flattered at halftime to only win as little as we did. And to be honest with you, I don't think management can do anything about that. Like, it's very much player driven. We always hear so much now about inter-county squads being very much player driven groups, and management just facilitate them, give them the best possible structures to work under, and basically set them up with decent enough tactics that you can get the best out of your players. But for that, it just didn't happen. We're going to our conversion rate a bit, but like, you would be similar mindset as me as well, as in you never saw the comeback on.
No, because they just, as I said, they just weren't playing well enough. I mean, yes, if they came out with a different attitude and different mindset in the second half, and scored the first couple of points, you'd say, yeah, we're grand, we're in a good spot here. But they were never in a place where they were going well enough to be able to do it. I mean, there was a period, it was a 6 or 7-1 down. Galway went just after the first water break, and they scored the next 3 or 4 points in a row, and you said, no, yeah, we're on our way here. But again, there was time before half time to close that down further, and they just weren't able to do it. Dublin kind of settled it down again, and they got back. Not even that they got back on top, but they stopped that mini forward pressure that Galway enjoyed. And in terms of what Galway actually got out of that spell, it was only, as I say, kind of 4 or 5 points at most. And so it wasn't I mean, when we had a similar scenario against Waterford in the league, they racked up 2 or 3 or 4 without reply in no time, So it was just, they were just never going at a level where they could really do it. And even like the response to the goal, Whelan's goal, like the reaction after, Crummy went down straight after and kind of broke the game for a minute or so. But there was no even the roar after Whelan scored, or the reaction from players, the exhilaration, the fist pumps, they weren't there, and it was just a case of, yeah, we got a goal now, we'll get going again now here, and we'll kind of drive it on, get a few more scores and get back in front. But it just never happened, and it never was going to happen. Like, that game could have stayed going, as I say, for the rest of the night, and Galway just would not have won it.
Yeah, and I suppose one thing that decided more than anything else was our poor conversion rate. Like, well, I go through some of it here. Like, but I before I go into it, I said, like, a lot of this talk about hunger and intensity and this kind of stuff. Like, I really don't think it's I don't see how it could have a massive bearing at this. Like, you're playing in a Leinster semi-final. You haven't won, provincial title in a few years. You felt you left one behind you last year. Sure, like Dublin in 2019, you mentioned earlier, there's any amount of motivating factors there from a Galway point of view, to win this game and win it comfortably, and they didn't produce. But just on the conversion rate, just abysmal figures here. Just go down through them. I think with 37 shots, 15 scores, in or around 40% conversion rate. took one of our 5 goal chances with 12 wides, with 2 shots that dropped short. We only scored 1-8 from play, with 1 score from 6 65s and sidelines between the both, and which are getting on the field. You think sidelines are nearly 65s at this point, but it wasn't be the case on the day. I think what else did I hear? I've other marked down. I think with 8 wides and 3 goal chances before we even scored our second point. In that spell, just if you're producing these numbers like in a junior B game or junior C game, you're going to get your wings clipped, and you're going to get a fairly horrific hiding, even at that level. Never mind intra-county hurling, where you're playing elite level, you're playing against Dublin. Mightn't be the top 6-7 team in the country, but they're still a good team. And we had been forewarned, as you said, the Antrim game already, 2019. That's what really grinds my gears. Is we had the signs there. We had if anything, you should be bowling. Imagine Kilkenny under Cody, and Dublin had beaten them, say, a couple of years previous in a crunch game to draw them out of the championship. And this is the reaction that they live like. I tell you, Kilkenny wouldn't have had the reaction, particularly in their prompt. Maybe they might have it now because they don't have the player personnel. But just shocking, the really, really poor standard of shooting, Patrick, by and large, doesn't it?
Yeah, and oftentimes the choice of shot and choice shot in terms of where you were on the field and what, I guess, where you're going for a point or going for goals, it was just the wrong decision made far too often. I mean, we've already mentioned Canning's early 21. There was other ones as well, where there was just, I mean, in fairness, Conor Cooney's one, probably he had done enough. He'd beaten 2 or 3 defenders and he could have shot it over earlier, but when he got into the position, he was probably right to take on the goal chance. I mean, Joseph Cooney's execution for the goal, his attempt was just, it was a feeble effort, and it was the easiest save Alan Nolan made all day. And then in the second half, when they really needed one, I mean, the Whelan one was the kind of goal we created and we scored in the league. I mean, you think of the Cork one would say, for example, the Whelan got blown Park. We have similar sort of a goal in some respects in terms of where he took the ball and how he finished it. Those other ones in the first half, they weren't the same sort of chance, if you know what I mean, in terms of taking the point. Was probably the easier option more often than not. And it just if you had gotten the scoreboard ticking over early, get your 2 or 3 points up, you would have forced Dublin out of their shape perhaps somewhat in terms of having to push on a small bit and not flood the bodies back. Because I mean, you think of Dublin's inside line, Keane Boland 13, Keane O'Sullivan 15. They spent most of the game out around midfield. Now Keane Boland had to go off after about 25 minutes or that, or half an hour. But he scored a point early on. But most of their work was being done out the way. We already touched on Donald Burke. He played a very deep role as centre forward. I mean, Ronan Hayes was the focal point of their attack, and then kind of most good things that they did. Danny Sutcliffe was central to it as well. He had a phenomenal game, perhaps outstanding game. Nearly would have been my man of the match. I know you probably would have given it to Nolan, but I mean, the two of them and Conor Burke as well. In fairness, they were their top performers of the day. So yeah, just, I mean, as I already said, if you're playing a team like a Kilkenny or a Limerick or a Waterford, Galway would have got the scoreboard ticking over that way in the first quarter, and they would have. I mean, one point we had scored after at the first water break. It's hard to comprehend. Granted, we hit a lot of balls wide, but still, we shouldn't have had a point after 17 minutes of hurling. At the level we're playing, and considering you rack up 428, against Waterford a couple of weeks earlier, it's inexcusable, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a real humbling kind of thing, really, more than anything else. We as much as anyone, we came in with such confidence in the players and the group as a whole, and just to see this now, you'd be kind of scratching your head and asking yourself, how did this happen, or why, or because a lot of those point efforts in the first half alone were very much on. They were decent efforts. You'd be expecting to score. You'd expect your run of the mill club forward to be knocking them over. Regardless. And a lot of people spoke about Crow Park, the move to Crow Park, and how much it'll benefit us in that extra space. Lord Almighty, Jesus, if anything, like we can't be blaming Parnell Park for that defeat in 2019 if that's what we're producing in Crow Park in 2021. You mentioned Kenning there and that early chance. Well, I know we'll discuss it more early on in the 21, but just his stats alone, like just unbelievable. We'll never see a day like it again. I think. I don't think he's ever endured a day like it. From my reckoning, he had 18 shots. He'd only 6 scores. I'll just go down through it here. I have it up here 2 seconds. Kenning had took 6 frees. He scored 4 points. What's that? 80% conversion rate. It's not desperate. Then he had 6 shots in play. He managed a point.
66%, if you're good at your math.
Oh, sorry. It's a long weekend and long. You're right. I'll edit that one out anyway before it gets in. So, but he'd only 1 point from his 6 shots in play. He'd 4 65s. He only scored a point, and he missed 2 sidelines. As we said before, he's nearly probably 70% to land the sideline at this point. Like 18 shots, 6 scores. Now there is the mitigating factor. Maybe his hand injury affected his preparation coming in. There is that. I know there's people out there that are using this scoring record and getting in his head and stuff like that. Like we were joking about it beforehand. Like Joe Kenning has handled a lot bigger pressure than the scoring record, and like it's going to come regardless. It's not like he's on his final game and he needs to nail 11 points, or 12 points to hit the scoring record. He's going to have plenty of opportunities. Well, geez, on this record, he mightn't. He mightn't have them this year. Like he'll probably get over the line the next day, if he's taking the prize. But I don't think the scoring record played any bearing on it whatsoever. I think he's had a lot bigger, pressure moments between Club All Ireland finals, All Ireland semi-finals. That point against Tipperary, he's nailed frees and high pressure moments. The All Ireland at the first day out against Kilkenny in 2015 was it? 2012. Sorry, yeah, that's right. With Davy Glennon won the prize. That's right. Sorry, he nailed that. Like, but the Kenning's performance the last day, there was nearly a cause from genuinely being subbed. Such was the lack of influence he had on proceedings. And to be honest with you, like I know some people they'll probably defend Joe Kenning to the hilt, and we would by and large as well. But it was I can't see how it wasn't his worst game in a Galway jersey. There was, taking off the frees, just like stuff that you'd never, ever hear of. Like normally he might have instances where, he's quiet from play, but, when he stepped over frees, 90% of them were going over the bar, which wasn't the case the last day. Worry would be maybe he hasn't set the world alight in championship over the last 5. Like even last year, think back, Wexford was probably his standout game from play, but he's been generally quiet. Now I know he's had a lot of injuries and stuff like was there a case, Patrick, of subbing him the last day, or what do you think, or what? Like, I take it firstly, you wouldn't put it down to the scoring record that people love to go with in the national media now, that they love to say, oh, Joe Kenning, the pressure of the scoring record got him. Like, I think that's absolute rubbish, being honest with you.
No question. No, that's definitely wasn't the case. It was just a case of, for me, not being tuned in the right manner for a championship game. I mean, Joe Kenning should be putting over 65s with his eyes closed, and the commentary on Sky Sports was noting the wind, the bit of wind in Crow Park. I mean, have they ever been to Salthill? I think Joe Kenning has definitely been to Salthill a few times and nailed a few frees in it. So I think that was hardly any either, No, for me it was just a case of not being tuned right, no more than those around him as well. He caught 1 or 2 good balls in the first half. He got a lovely point off his left. Which you thought maybe was things turning a bit for both him and Galway. That was during that sort of mini spell where Galway actually were on top. But it didn't carry on. And I mean, in reality, he probably should have been off the freeze earlier than he was. Another he definitely would have been well off them before Kenning was, and in terms of whether he should have been substitute or not. I mean, the fact that only Niall Burke and Nyland came on in attacking roles, and again we've noted here, have we overplayed just in terms of, are we actually as strong and as well stocked as we think we are? Possibly not, given if management didn't feel that there were the lads on the bench that could come in and turn that game, because let's not make no mistake about it, this game was there for won up until kind of 5 minutes from the end. Really, that was the only time where you kind of felt that this is beyond us nearly at this stage. Barring a miracle, which in terms of scoring a goal or anything, which it never looked like coming, bar certainly in the second half anyhow. So they felt the likes of Jam Onions and the Jason Flynn's couldn't come on and turn the game. So that's another concerning area in terms of, these obviously Flynn in particular has a lot of experience, and Jam Onion saw a nice bit of action during the league, but they felt based on what they'd seen that those lads weren't going to offer any more coming off the bench. So that's another debate to be had. But as I say, as I said in the player ratings I had to up today, surely, and you said it yourself, surely things will never be as bad again in terms of Canning's waywardness and blindness in front of goal. Certainly hope not anyhow.
Yeah, well, like none of us are saying like to drop Joe Kenning or something ludicrous like that, but I'm just saying, like, perhaps it's it's one of those days when it's not your day. Like, it's simple as that. We've seen, like, his influence isn't as big as it was once for Galway. Like, no one, I think, will debate that. So, when you're not having the day that you'd hope for and things aren't going your way, maybe there is a chance for a different option, and maybe a bit of pace from Jan Mannion in attack, because we by and large we probably needed more goals to win that game because we weren't able to claw it back with points. Dublin were like, our shooting wasn't on point. Dublin were probably forcing us, they were putting on good pressure and stuff on us and things like that. So all in all, though, like, still, I got sent some stats today. It's one of these ones that analysis teams have these days, and it's expected points. So essentially, right, it's the same as in soccer. You might see it. It's XG, and if you score from the penalty spot, a penalty in soccer is, I think, it's 0.77 of a goal, which is what is worth. So that means you score 3 out of 4. Whereas in hurling, you could, I think a shot from maybe the 21 straight in front of the goals for a point is probably 0.98 or something like that. But Galway chalked up like 30 points worth of chances in that they should be scoring by and large. They had 40 shots. Their actual points was 17, but their expected points are 30 in a statistical point, which means that they underperformed the expected points tally by minus 13.61. Whereas in Dublin, to contrast, like, Dublin had 30 shots to our 40. They scored 21 points. Their expected points overall was 17. So, like, they overperformed by 3.31, and that's got to do with the quality of the shots you're taking and where you're taking them from. I'm guessing there's probably a link to regard to pressure and if there's someone beside you. So, like, Galway had a higher shot quality overall than Dublin, which is crazy to think, considering how poorly we were able to execute our shots. Galway, like, as you said, please God, Jesus, we'll never have a day like that again. Anyway, I don't remember anything. We've had some dark days following Galway, but normally when the dark days you're following Galway, they weren't anywhere near as strong as a team as we have now, which makes it probably even worse. Like, for the last 2 years, in my humble opinion now, and it's probably not worth a lot, that Galway have had the best team in Leinster over the last 2 years. Whatever about further on, we probably should have had 2 Leinster titles now in Shane O'Neill's reign, regardless of what's to come. And that's we've had the best squad, so we should be delivering. And not to have any so far it's deeply disappointing. Like, I know people say the provincial isn't worth a lot, but at the end of the day, there's no harm in winning a few with them either. It's a confidence builder, and most of all, it creates a decent pathway. And I know we'll go into it later on, our pathway for the future, but it creates a nice pathway towards winning an Ireland final. You avoid the Munster champions, most likely Limerick, until a final, and you have less games, you have more recuperation, you have more rest time, and it gives chance. If there's an injury, it gives lads a chance to get back as well, which is, it's another carrot that maybe isn't always there in it at the moment. Like, that direct route is now past us, and we don't have the possibility of a trap door that we can fall through. It's shit or bust at this point, to be perfectly honest. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I saw people on Twitter and that wondering, rating this Galway performance, and is it the worst we've seen in how long, and that, and comparing it to defeats around 9 or 10 years ago in terms of, you think of the loss to Dublin back in 2011 and down in Portlaoise, a win that really sort of kickstarted that Dublin era under Anthony Daly, along with the league final win, obviously. You think of the Leinster final a couple of years later, 2013, wasn't it? The Leinster final defeat to Dublin.
Yeah.
You think the Waterford game at Croke Park in 2011. I mean, they were all very poor performances. I think Clare in 2013 as well. very poor performances, but those teams weren't as good as this team is, and as this team has been consistently for the last 4 years or so, really, like, you know. So that's what would make it stand out for me as the worst performance I can remember in that sort of that timeline, you know. That's certainly the most disappointing in terms of coming away from the ground and what you know, put the postmortems in the way home. Thankfully, there was only about around 2,000 people having to suffer through that miserable journey home, and you know, yeah, it wouldn't have been a pleasant one, and that's for sure. But trying to ascertain what actually happened and why they were so far off it and so well beaten. It is hard to nail it down, no matter how many times you go back and look at it, or even if you were there watching it yourself. You know, just I think the reaction is the most important thing from here on, really, isn't it? You know, I mean, you know, if they go out the next day and we're going to go through the pathway, as you say, if there's going to be nothing easy from here on to even get to a quarterfinal, you know, you're going to have to go through maybe one or two Munster teams to even get there. So, you know, if the reaction to that is good and you get through them, you're certainly in a position where they're going to be playing well enough to possibly go on and you know, compete for an All-Ireland, whatever, but win it. But, you know, then the mileage is another an issue for with that, obviously. But you know, how they react to this defeat will kind of explain a lot about this performance as well. You know, if they go out and hurl the same way the next year, you say there's something badly wrong in terms of what they're doing or how players are going out and approaching games or whatever. But, you know, if they go out and they play very well the next day and then they win their qualifier game, you're kind of thinking, right, maybe we're over whatever happened that last day. It's put to bed now. We're on the road forward again. So probably until then, really, you're kind of clutching at straws and scratching your head and wondering what exactly did happen. But I mean, you have the stats there in front of you, and they did a lot in terms of, you know, Galway should have scored 30 points in that game, but they only scored 17. You know, Dublin should have scored 17, but they managed to score 21. That's a big determining factor there in itself, isn't it?
That's for sure. And I suppose one aspect, and we know we touched on it earlier on, maybe, you know, the goals and the early, you know, appetite to seek them out instead of maybe getting the sport war taken over. I know we've gone into it, but, you know, outside maybe, you know, Kenning's chance, which was a good one, you know, not the free, and Whelan's one aside, most of them were kind of only half chances. And you mentioned it already, like we seem to be trying to force them a small bit. Like we touched on it here, we were crying out for goals, chances to try and craft them. But some days they're just not on. Like, you know, some days you're going to get a bit more space than others. And to be fair, that didn't look like a game where we were going to get a host of goal chances. We seem to be trying to manufacture them more than anything else. Just on the first one, I think you already said it already, but would by and large tap over that Kenning free from the 21. Like, I think he kind of almost signaled that he was going to go for it. He took a couple of steps back. You know, he's kind of from his style. If you know the way he does it, unless he's taking a long range free, he'll always more or less won't take too many steps into it. But he kind of set up like he was kind of go for it. Which kind of maybe signals it a small bit as well. Now, who are we to tell Joe Kenning out to the freeze? And I know Shane O'Neill has said that Kenning in the past has license to go for what he wants. But it was, you know, it was a big moment even at the start. And you said, you touched on it already, that you felt it maybe motivated Dublin a small bit to say, like, who the hell do Galway think they are coming down? Like, you know, like you have a tap over point here that you think you can beat us no matter what. You're trying to put us away even before the game is kicked off more than anything else. Yeah,
and I mean, I interviewed Conor Cooney last week, and, you know, the whole topic of goals and that came up, and he was saying, he made a good point, like, in terms of, you know, if you take her scores from deep, it's going to be forcing teams to shove out in you and create that space inside, and possibly that's probably where your goals are actually going to come from, you know, which is a very, very valid point. But that certainly wasn't how it transpired in terms of how Galway went about things. The last, you know, they were taking on 3 and 4 Dublin men at times, trying to go through them and get shots off. I mean, the Canning one, as you say, the one from play, where Cloncannon managed to flick a ball onto him, he picked it up, and that it should have been stuck, like, you know, no question about it. But it was the right decision to go for goal. You know, but other ones were definitely forced, and taking the point would have been the better option. I mean, even the Cannon's flick over the top for Whelan in the second half was ridiculous. Like, I mean, every other time Cannon had that ball in his hand, he would have stuck it over. Like, you know, in previous games, be it league or championship. I mean, it was a half chance at best. You know, it had to be a perfect pass, and you still had the problem of Whelan. It was never a stick pass that was going to be pinned straight to his hand. It was always going to be floated over the top, which gave both the goalie and the Dublin defenders time to react and put pressure on Whelan and get back into a position where they could possibly block him off for that. Like, you know, and it wasn't like he was standing in 10 yards of space right in front of goal with nobody near him. Like, you know, it wasn't a goal chance. Like, it should have been stuck over the bar. And there was a time where, had it been stuck over the bar, Galway would have been back again a point closer, a time where, you know, we were just shortly after the first goal, and had they built on that with a couple of scores, we could be having a totally different conversation. But again, it was just being forced needlessly, and it was just it came across like they always thought that they'd just be able to win it, like, you know, no matter what they did, and that the scores would always come when they actually needed them near the home stretch. But again, down that last 10 minutes, you know, they never looked like winning the game, like, you know, which was obviously hugely disappointing.
That's for sure. That's for sure. I suppose just one Galway man leaving Croke Park last, well, maybe two between. I think it's Matty and Gavin Carey. I think they'd be two Galway men happy enough leaving Croke Park on Saturday evening. But you know, you have to give credit to Matty. Like, he was under a lot of pressure there in recent weeks. A lot of people were talking, if this year goes sour for Dublin, you know, he's probably going to be out with his P45. A lot of people were saying, you know, Davy's last year in Wexford, maybe he comes up and he fills in, and, you know, it's worth a couple of quid to him maybe as well. You know, Davy might be well compensated for making that trip up from 6 Mile Bridge up to Parnell Park or wherever they be trained, UCD or DCU, or I'm not 100% sure. But you got to give Matty credit. Like, he's you know, he got his tactical battle spotted. He clearly knows the Galway players inside out. He clearly knew, you know, where he could get a bit of joy, where he couldn't. And Dublin set up, you know, it really caused Galway problems. Even if we say here that Dublin weren't that great, they were still fully deserved winners.
Oh yeah, no question about that. And yeah, credit to him, as I say, for putting that plan in place and having the buy-in of the players. That was very evident from the way Dublin went about their business and how they implemented the plan. You know, there was a structure to them, and a sort of a drive and a hunger in them that was very clear to see. You know, so they clearly have that buy-in, you know, both between players and management, which is it's half the battle in many respects. You know, wanting to play for your manager, trusting that what he's putting in place for you is going to reap the rewards, which it did, obviously. But you know, we spoke last week in the preview about the Antrim game. In many respects, was the pressure game for them, and they got through that impressively. And really, even despite that, you know, they weren't expected to win this game, so it was a free cut in many respects. And where it leaves them now, the prize for winning it is they're into an All-Ireland quarter-final now, no matter what happens. You know, had they not obviously won the last day, they're facing the same road the Galway are now facing. We have to go through possibly two games, if not one, to even get to that quarter-final against top-tier opposition. So it was a free cut in many respects. A game they could really go out and have a go at, and a game that they clearly targeted from, you know, I mean, they've been working towards this, as I said already, throughout the whole league, and it has all come together for them at the right time. They're peaking right now, and I guess the hope for us is that we didn't peak too soon, and hopefully we're not on a downward spiral. But certainly based on what we saw the last day, we are. But as I said, the reaction to that will determine where or not, or where we're actually headed from here on, for not only for this season, but for the rest of Shane O'Neill's tenure, to be honest.
Well, one thing we always say is, like, it's how you respond to adversity. The good teams normally bounce back with a positive display and a positive result. And you know that you're never going to keep a good team down for too long, if nothing else. And this Galway hurling team, I still believe, and I know you do as well, that they're a very strong team, and they're, like, it's crazy and all. I'd probably be laughed out the door. I still think they're the second best team in Ireland. Like, Dublin performance aside, I'm sure someone will probably well saw it into me and tell me how wrong I am with that anyway, and maybe rightly so. But like as bad and all as a lot of things were, one good line of the field, and you mentioned already, was our full back line, like a fairly inexperienced full back line. I think all three of them won their individual barts. I thought Darren Murphy hurled very well. Same with Shane Cooney. Didn't think Garage Beck and Ernie did anything wrong whatsoever. I thought from them out, if every line on the field played as well as that line, I think we would have been absolutely fine, and we would have won the game.
Yeah, no question about it. And I mean, like, in fairness, like, Garage Mac had a tough assignment the last day. Ronan Hayes, a player who's, he's a big man, he's a great athlete, he's a good stick man, a good finisher, and he's bringing decent form into it. He's scored a goal, nice couple of points last weekend against Antrim, and he got 2 here, but he didn't really. He's a real goal threat for them and a real goal getter, and he had the one-sided goal, which in fairness, Aina did brilliantly for it, and have to give huge credit to him for that. The way he came off his line, with the right decision to come off his line, make himself big, and he got some part of his body, or I don't know, was the hurdle, to be honest. It was hard to tell exactly what part of it came off, but it came off a bit of him anyhow, and it went out and ended up in a wide ball. So credit to him for that. You do need your goalie to bail out a couple of times, and on that occasion he did for us. And I mean, the goal had nothing to do with our full back line really. It was 2 runners coming from further out the field that weren't tracked, and they were punished for it. And you have to call out Park and Finton-Burke for that one. They were both 5-6 yards behind Crummy. I think it was James Madden. I think was the other runner going through. Which you can't afford to switch off like that. I was giving out to my a couple of my under 13s last week for switching off against Ardrahan when a couple of runners went through. Like, this is an elite level, and players of that caliber are doing it. So I might go and apologise to the couple of lads at training tomorrow night. But, but you can't afford a mistake like that. Had those 2 runs been tracked, the ball pinpoint and all as it was, it wouldn't have been won cleanly, because there would have been 2 Galway players there to fight it. Like, that's the reality. You give Oisin O'Rourke all the credit in the world for hitting a lovely ball across the square, and equally Crummy, the way he controlled it and finished it well. But it wouldn't have happened if the runs were tracked properly, and that again was our half-back line not being at the pitch of it. Our full back line had done their job. They'd stopped the initial point scoring opportunity for the corner forward, where he was left in a position where all he could do was kind of square it across and try pick out a pass for somebody else. As a cornerback or a full back, that's your job done if your man's not getting shots off. In many respects. But yeah, it was from there out that the problems began. And I mean, Park Mannion definitely had a lot of good. I thought he had a lot of good moments in the game. In terms of, he got a few excellent blocks. He got forward for his point and put in a few excellent tackles. But again, as I said in my player ratings today, Danny Sutcliffe was one of the lads in contention for man of the match, and he had a huge influence on the game. And most of it was from an attacking perspective. He scored, I think it was 3 points picked off himself. He played a lot of really, really clever ball, used the ball brilliantly, won a couple of frees off Mannion as well. So yeah, and I guess that kind of brings us on to the whole Dahi Burke at 6 conundrum. And for me, again, I was happy for it to be them to go with it the last day. I said I just would like to see it in the East Championship, see how both parties do. And I mean, Garage did fine. We're not here calling for it to be changed because of Garage struggling at 3. That's not the case at all. But it's just the fact that Dahi isn't dominating or dictating the game like you'd hope he would at 6. And if I was analysing Dahi's performance last day, you couldn't pick out a lot of stuff he did wrong or did poorly as such. But for me, he doesn't have the influence at 6 to justify bringing him out of 3. That's the way I see it now, and I think we could have better alternatives now and work things in a better way going forward with Dahi back at 3, and it might even mean Garage Mac not being on the team, and that's certainly a harsh take on him, having been one of our better players the last day. But it's all about finding that right balance and that right mix that works best for Galway. And possibly, for me, it could potentially be a Dahi at 3 and possibly a Shane Cooney or somebody like that back out at 6. Just a good ball player, a man who's going to pick out a pass, be it short or long. Understands the position, having played it obviously for years now with Thomas's. Granted, it's a step up at inter-county level, but you know the logistics and the basic elements of how it's played, you know, in terms of having a centre forward that's going to sit in yards, you're going to roam deep, having to work it out with your midfielders, all that's still the same. You know, so might be an option to going forward, but equally Fintan hasn't taken to senior championship hurling the way we would have hoped either. You know, he doesn't. Again, he's a player with the physical presence to dominate under opposition puck out, especially. And he just hasn't been doing it. You know, look, it's not a case of writing these players off or anything like that. Of course not. You know, they're still the best players in the county, and you know they're, you know, if they bounce back and have great games the next day, we'll be the happiest lads in the county about it, and that's all we hope for. But equally, you know, the expectations are at a level now where you want these lads to be performing to a better level, and you know that line of the field was certainly one of our weaker ones on Saturday. You know.
Yeah, perhaps even the weakest, maybe along with the full forward line. That'll probably be my take on it anyway. I concur with everything you say. I think the argument now for Dahi going back to 3 is more of what he's not doing for us at 6, rather than what anything that Garage Mac is doing wrong. I think that's the crux of the argument there. We've always said it was nice to experiment and have a look at it. We probably thought that the Dublin experiment we would have won the game anyway, regardless of you know how much trouble either player was in or in position, or we could always switch it back up. It would be very hard in Garage McInerney. It would be fierce hard, because I think over the course of everything he's probably been one of our standout defenders. He's definitely he's offered Dahi's form at present seems to have maybe dropped a small bit, and maybe that's the switching around, and you know maybe the late comeback, and you know etc. He just seems to he hasn't found top gear, and maybe the safest bet for the remainder of the championship would be to have him at 3. It's centrally for Garage only. Then at that point, this is our take on it. Maybe the boys management team feel differently, but our take has always been that you kind of have to have Garage centrally. So that's one. I'd agree. I think I would have loved to see now Shane Cooney. If you had, the problem was with this maybe even lessened league schedule, or you know what I mean, we might have had another game where we might have been able to experiment a small bit more, and you might have been able to. If you had this performance in the league where Dahi played like maybe has played like this up at this point, maybe it could be the case of trialing Shane Cooney. You know, at this point, but it's going to be very hard to chuck him in now. Maybe the next day at 6, and you know, inter-county, you know, championship game against, you know, one of the heavy hitters, we'll say, and we will go down through them after a while. So yeah, but the problem is if you move Shane Cooney as well, like then you're down one at 2. Maybe I suppose Aidan Hart comes in, but then like has Fenton done enough to justify his place? Like I think Pádraig Mannion's form has only been middling so far all through 2021. I think he had a couple of good games, he had a couple of middling games as well at the same point. Now, to be fair, some of them were at 6 as well, and I think from the evidence we've seen that Pádraig Mannion isn't the answer at 6. So we still have to find that. Like it's as you touched on beforehand, it's arguably maybe not as crucial a position as it used to be. Your distribution is now the most important thing. We're not good. You mentioned before we came on here, it's not going to be your Shawnee McMahon role where they're raining a ball down on top of you. You're trying to beat the centre forward on a high ball, or clearing the ball, dropping around and bursting out of the defence, and you know delivering in long. It's a lot more to it. Like I think we've seen how the game has changed. You look at how Declan Hannon plays it. He's a lot more, you know, cautious with possession. He's, you know, his distribution is good. He's normally willing to hand it off. Like he probably, like the perfect position player would be, you know, a Garage McInerney with maybe just a small bit more stick work for the 40, 50 yard stick passes down the line, you know, or, you know, cross field balls like that. So maybe that would be the way to go with it. That would be a worry. I don't know. I wouldn't like to have to try and pick it this week, or in the next couple of weeks, trying to sort that out. But maybe it depends on who you're playing against as well. I suppose moving on. So one thing, another maybe slight positive was maybe I think David Burke, when he came on in midfield, we were kind of debating. Maybe I was kind of maybe of the opinion maybe Sean Loftus was a bit lucky or a bit unlucky maybe been taken off, because I didn't think he done a whole lot wrong. But you made the very valid point that he hurled essentially no ball in midfield, and I do think that David Burke improved this when he came on. So, but we did see that we were missing the Johnny Cohen figure there, weren't we? Really, a bit of a spoiler, maybe, even if he could spoil Ian McBride, who had a big influence in proceedings. And I suppose Cahill's influence, he shooting was, he was very poor in the first half. His distribution in was poor in the first half. Like a lot of the possessions were at tops 50-50 Galway. A lot other ones were, and it wasn't just Cahill sending them in. A lot of them were, even favourite to the Dublin defender, because they normally had an extra body around to, snuff out the danger. So, like, midfield is another worry. Like you were talking about lines that struggled. Midfield was a line that struggled, wasn't it, as well, Patrick?
Yeah, and I mean, Cahill got on the world of all. Like, I don't know, there's certainly no one on the Galway team who had more possession than Cahill Mannion. And he did some good things with it as well. But by and large, I mean, as I've said to a couple of people now that I've been chatting to, I said Cahill Mannion has put more balls wide in this month than he has in the last 3 years. And I don't think that's even an exaggeration, like whenever he gets a ball in his hand, you think back to some of the Tip games, the brilliant games with Tip and Croke Park, or that game in 2015 against Waterford and Thurles. He was just getting ball anywhere in the field, and he just seemed to be able to stick it over there, be it on the run or standing up and winding up, whatever. Whereas here, he got one good one in the second half, but the ones he missed, like they're all bread and butter for a striker of his caliber and a player who just never. It didn't feel like he used to miss, like like you couldn't question his endeavour or his appetite to get on ball. And I say he looked to take the right option, and what he was trying to do with the ball was nearly always right, but just the execution of it wasn't. There was balls he was hitting diagonal the right corner in the first half, and they were being plucked, cut out by the Dublin spare man, who it was never a kind of a set sort of figure. There just seemed to be a spare man there an awful lot of the time, cutting out the supply to our inside line. So that ball there's still plenty of space to get that ball in. I mean, the Galway Miners faced a sweeper in the first half against Limerick on Friday night, and some of the ball they hit into their inside line was just unbelievable, top class. And we spoke about Brian Hanley after, and huge credit and plaudits given to his halfbacks and midfielders after. He said it was such a key factor in terms of creating those scoring opportunities for our forwards, and it made heroes out of like the Cullen Malloy and these sort of fellas. Like they were getting out ahead of their men and just having a ball delivered on a plate. And I mean, you just could only feel for the Limerick cornerback having to try to deal with it, and that should have been the case for Galway as well. Like, that should have been the kind of ball Brian Kincannon was getting, and equally Brian Kincannon should have been there to get it and not standing behind him like the one Cian O'Callaghan burst out in the first half ahead of him, and he was trailing behind him, So yeah, and I mean, Loftus is a ball player. Loftus isn't he's not your kind of spoiler. He's defensively minded in terms of he has he's played sweeper plenty of times. He's a good tackler in terms of his his ability to get blocks as he got two in the first half. Credit to him for that, and flicks and that sort of thing. He's excellent at it. But he's there as an outlet, there as a ball player. He should be taking passes off his wing backs, off his full backs, taking passes in space, turning and taking a couple of steps and delivering it on, be it another 20 or 30 yards, or pinning that ball into the corners to our inside line. And he just didn't do that. He just didn't get on ball in those areas and move it on to a man in a better position and get Galway going on the front foot. So no, for me, it wasn't a harsh substitution. I do think David Burke did settle it and improve things a bit without having a massive influence on things. He certainly went about his business and had a decent enough showing. But yeah, whether he's a 70-minute man again, only they kind of know that. So actually play starts and get 70 minutes for a couple of years at this stage now at a senior county level. So yeah, things to be worked on there again, as you say. And no more than half forward line again. There's not a set half forward line we can discuss like you would do in the kind of the other lines back the way. They were all had their spell out there. But for me, the thing was, I didn't feel like we set up the same way we set up in league games. In terms of, you know, we've spoke about it at length in league games, the previews or review shows about, you know, that kind of fourth half hour floating around the place, and the role we kind of nailed down for Evan Nyland. Like, you know, I would say Adrian Tubby was named at 12 the last day, and he spent no time playing at 12 anyhow, you know, but he wasn't that sort of floating wing forward either. It was much more third midfielder, kind of fourth half back in many respects, more defensive, I thought, than what we had been doing. And, like, you know, had we had that fourth half forward, you wouldn't have had the issue of Dublin having a spare man in the half back line to cut out these balls from Cotton Mannion that were being played, trying to find the inside line, because there would have been a Galway man there to compete for it. You know, so that was a disappointing factor for me in terms of how we went about the game. Like, I couldn't nail down or tell you exactly what Ado's role was or what he was meant to be doing. You know, I think he only hit about 2 balls in the game and was taken off after about 34 minutes, and certainly he didn't contribute anything really positive to what Galway did, but it just seemed to totally bypass him in many respects. And I just, as I say, it was kind of hard to nail down exactly what he was meant to be doing. I mean, the return on puckouts wasn't bad. That was one, you know, sort of positive to take out of it, kind of 50-50 on our own puckouts anyhow, which is an improvement on what we've seen throughout the league. So that was decent, I suppose. But by and large, didn't get the return we would have hoped for. Again, no more than the most other lines in the field, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose out of the attack, maybe Whelan anyway. Whelan, I thought he stood up a bit, and when, like, he tried,
Yeah.
you know, he's characteristic game. He bagged a goal. He battled for everything. He never gave up. Like, he was kind of was a real leadership figure in attack. And Conor Cooney, I thought, was decent as well. Like, in comparison to, you know, the players around him. I thought he had a decent game, and certainly, you know, if a few other Galway attackers performed even to Conor Cooney's level, I think we would have been okay. But it just didn't pan out like that at all. I'd agree with you entirely. I didn't know what Adrian Tui's role was in wing forward, and maybe that's I don't think that's on him either, to be honest with you. I think that's, you know, like, it didn't seem to be clear instruction. Like, maybe now we're picking this up completely the wrong way, and there was clear instruction, but it didn't seem like there was, for whatever reason. Like, normally when you see a defensive kind of wing forward, they're back a lot, or they're working harder on the middle third, or they're showing for position from deep. But, like, he was floating between the two 65s without, you know, getting in massive tackles or tracking runs, or, you know, showing for possession, or, you know, getting in around his body and around the breakdown or anything like that. Like, so I really just don't understand it. Like, it's like, you know, like, it's hard not, like, it's hard enough, like, it's harsh enough that he was taken off because he didn't get a chance to show what he could do, but his performance probably didn't justify him staying on either. You know what I mean, in that kind of sense. But he was far from alone. Like thought Joseph Cooney had a very mediocre game. I just thought didn't really offer anything. You touched on his team shot early on, like, just nothing. Like, kind of, you know, Jesus Christ, she's under 14 goalkeeper, under 12 goalkeeper, but would have blocked it like no bother. Like, you know, which is he just doesn't seem to be firing all cylinders. Cork game aside, where he seemed to have a bit of a renaissance. Like, outside of that, we haven't really seen the best of him since. Like, Limerick last year, he was poor in the half back line, and even he did have a bit more influence when he went wing forward, but still it was a mediocre show. And I think for the majority of the game time he held on the league, Cork aside, he wasn't really shooting the lights out either. Like, so, like, again, that's why we wanted Nyland to start. Like, it didn't have to be for Adrian Tui or you know, it could have been for Joseph Cooney. It could have been from a number of players he could have started, and I think we would have got more out of him because he's such an intelligent hurler. Moving on, I suppose, finally, just like kind of on the bench, and like we spoke on it there, and we thought we had a lot more options. Doesn't appear like we do now at this stage. It's amazing how the narrative can change after one game. Nyland and Niall Burke was only on late. I think I was reading your player ratings, and he didn't even get a rating, so that'll tell you how little he was on for. So, like, do we have the lack of options? One option I will say, and sorry, I should have mentioned it before, and Aidan Hart. I thought he had a big contribution. I thought he's done enough now again to start the last 10. Aidan Hart, anytime he seems to be not playing, his stock seems to rise, because it's only then you really seem to miss the consistency and the level of performance he brings to the game. It's only when he's missing that you realise what you're missing out on. But other than that, I think we've plenty of options defensively. But in attack, maybe not so much. Like, they weren't willing to risk Kevin Cooney. They didn't risk Jan Mannion. I like, there's plenty of other attackers that are just going to win. Jason Flynn didn't get minutes either. Like, so it's one of these things now. Maybe we're not as, like, I know yourself and Michael Verney were on about it last week. You thought, Jesus, you have any amount of options here and there, but I don't know, do we, after one game? Maybe hopefully next a couple of weeks' time we're back and we're saying, geez, we've any amount of options, and the bench contributed 1-5 and play after coming on. But Jesus, it's hard to see on that show, and it clear the management didn't have faith them either, because I think our problems were more so up front than further back. I know our back line was under pressure, but I thought we needed to sort out up front maybe a bit more than attacking, and we didn't see much change.
Yeah, no question. And again, it's always easy for subs to come in and make an impact when you're 6-7 points up and score 1-2 or 1-3 from play, or whatever it is. But it's on days like this where you really need a spark to come from somewhere. And Nyland did his bit coming in. Hart definitely improved things, both in a defensive, and obviously he stayed on then when Josh Cooney went off. He stayed on for him, so he got a small bit more forward and got his point in the second half as well. So he definitely improved things. But apart from that, if the options were there and they genuinely felt that these lads are going to change the game and improve things for us, they would have come in, because they were crying. The attack was crying out for some fresh legs, just fresh energy and hunger to go out and grab the game by the scruff neck, get out in front of your man, win a ball, turn and stick it over, like saw Flynn and Niall Burke doing in that 2017 All Ireland. Like, he's over crying out for somebody to just get a couple of scores like that. But I mean, for whatever reason, or purely obviously based on what they've seen, they felt that they didn't have those personnel on the bench. They didn't think they could do it. So that has to be a concern going forward. I mean, all those players we mentioned had moments during the league, but again, that step up from league championship was there, and maybe they didn't think that they were able to make that step up. So I mean, you'd have to be concerned about it, wouldn't you? Because you didn't know as well. You didn't expect there to be so many issues and so many players struggling that and probably deserving to come off, and and putting on 5 subs for 5 attackers, and would only have upset things totally in terms of there would have been no pattern or understanding of like was there before, would have upset things. There was no pattern upset in the first place. But yeah, I mean, definitely if there was players that you felt could have made an impact in attack, that they would have come on in that last quarter, and they didn't.
That's for sure. And I suppose with that defeat, it kind of leaves a fall of play at this. I just run down through it here. There's obviously before in the qualifiers, there's a preliminary qualifier round that it's going to be between Laois and Antrim, and after that, then you move into round 1, and Galway can't play the winners of Laois and Antrim, so that leaves a Munster side. So we have to play a Munster side in round 1 if we're drawn in round 1. So the potential leaves in round 1. We can either play ourselves or Wexford can play Waterford, Clare, Cork. There's going to be one, either ourselves or Wexford are going to get a bye into round 2, and one of those Munster teams I've mentioned there between Waterford, Clare and Cork are going to get a bye into round 2, which will mean you'll have an extra week. You'll have one less game. But you're left with the kind of possibility here of where to just even make an All-Ireland semi-final. You could have to beat, say Waterford hypothetically in round 1 if we're drawn there. You could have to beat Cork or Clare, one of them. Neither of them, are far from a bloody gimme at this point. And Clare's performance looked very good at the weekend, and outside the penalty incident, and we won't go into the game because it's done to death. And then you might have to play Tipperary in the quarter final as well. So you could have said Waterford, Clare, Tipperary, even All Ireland semi final, probably likely against Limerick maybe. And then a Kilkenny, what kind of a run is that to try and win an All Ireland in? It just deflates the whole thing when you see something like that now, and even if you get to round 2, you still could have to play, Waterford, Clare, Cork, and then Tipperary, then Limerick, and then Kilkenny to win an All Ireland. So it just it really, constricts our opportunity, and the safe passage of having the back door and avoiding these, which they are now, real shark infested waters in these knockouts at the moment. Do you think, like, obviously there's a slight possibility you could win the All-Ireland from this, but I'll be honest with you, I'm fairly downbeat on Galway's chances of coming through this with the grueling schedule, with everything, of being able to come through and produce performance week on week, which will be what needed to topple, say, Limerick in an All-Ireland semi-final.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be probably the greatest All-Ireland win of all time if we can go and do it. So I mean, I'd love to do that podcast in whatever 2 months' time or 6 weeks' time, whatever it is. But I mean, for other teams, I'd say it's more possible than it is for this Galway team. We were both of the belief that the likes of Galway and Tip both needed to make their road to the All-Ireland final as short as possible, just in terms of the age bracket of the team. There's no point saying pretending that Galway are a young team, because they're not. There are a lot of players late 20s who are certainly hurling wise at their peak, but the non-stop nature of what it's going to take to get there now. And I mean, like we all agree and that 2018, those replays against Kenny and Clare, Costco, when it came to the Ireland final, that's 3 years ago. Like, and the bones of that team are still there. Like, they're 3 years older now, and you're going to have to go on this grueling run that you've been through there. And I mean, I'm not downbeat in terms of, I think Galway could go out and put up a big performance and win their next qualifier game, even if it is against one of those top Munster teams, and they could do another job against another top Munster team the week after. But if they were to get through to another semi-final, I think they could just be out of their feet by the time they get there. Whatever about another final, a fortnight after that, or whenever it is, So I definitely believe that Galway can get to the level that we expect them to be at. But I think if they do, it'll take its toll eventually, and I won't be back in the winning, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I'd be the same, and I think they're going out to, is it 8-1 for the All-Ireland with the bookies, which is telling enough. Like, I think they were a lot shorter than that beforehand, whether they had a chance or not. Before we finish up, Patrick, I just have a word on the minors and All-Ireland final at the weekend. Lot heavy delay between everything, you know what I mean? Like, it's been a tough. What they played their last game in 2019 before August 2019 when they won the All-Ireland. So it's I must say it's a credit to Brian Henley and his management team that the players came out and they were so sharp against Limerick last Friday evening in Ennis. I think you were at it. Would I be right in saying I actually wasn't at it now? So, but you like the level of hurling that they played and the style of play they played, and it was if Saturday was a desperately disappointing day, Friday was a very encouraging day. Reflecting back on the performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great, brilliant to be at it, and a fantastic game. Really good teams. That Limerick team is a fine team as well. There's some great, serious talent that Limerick can take out of that team as well. They gave Galway bucket loads of it, and only for, and Brian Henley said it in the interview afterwards, only for that Michael Walsh save on the line. He said, we mightn't be here doing this same interview, and he could very well be right. There's been a lot of talk with this Galway minor team for weeks in advance of this, of how good they are and how, and considering that this is their first game, the first game where they've actually pulled on a maroon jersey and played another team outside of their own squad, like their Bs, AVBs. That's all they've been doing. Like, haven't been challenging games, haven't been allowed to have them. I thought it was an exceptional performance. I mean, conditions were very tough in the surface. The pitch was quite tight, it was quite burnt in places, and there was a fair bit of rain came down both that evening and during the match, and it was very slippy and greasy, and there were a lot of mistakes, especially in the first quarter. Galway lads were caught, they were slow in possession at times, they got hooked and blocked far too often. But again, that was just a case getting up that level required to, like we talked about the seniors, you're stepping up from AVB's games and training to playing Limerick in the Ireland semi-final, But once the first goal was key. Ruben David's goal. What a flaking goal it was too. Actually, the talent in the team is staggering. Like, and no, you think about it, you go through the team. Like, look at the defense. Shane Morgan was a forward in the 2019 team. Sean O'Hanlon was coming on as an attacker, really. Tiernan Killeen was wing forward. They're all back in man in the defence now. All very good the last day. Adam Nolan is a real presence at fullback. Excellent defender. The boys in the middle, Liam Lean is obviously, he seems to be hurling underage for I don't know how long. Seen him for playing for Preds for so many years and still hurling that. He's a fantastic prospect. And Craig Thomas, I thought, was hugely influential as centre forward. Brilliant in the air, and kind of there was a bit of an Aidan O'Shea about him in terms of you could kind of, when he caught a ball, they could kind of do what they wanted to him when he wasn't going getting frees. But in fairness, he always kept his cool and popped off a pass and went again. And then the inside line, like Liam Collins was exceptional, but probably was out when the game was over. But for me, Colin Malloy was undoubtedly man of the match. Just 5 points from play. Brilliant throughout. He wasn't a case of doing it at the end. He got a couple of key scores in the second half, and Galway were struggling for scores. Connor Slattery was very important in that section too, and Gavin Lee's goal was just class. And I mean, the point of the match, that piece of individual brilliance in terms of the run in, block it back to him all right at the third attempt. He eventually got it over the line, but absolutely brilliant. And he had a cracking game too. Now he couldn't begrudge him the man of the match. And it wasn't like he didn't deserve it now or anything like that, But I mean, just speaking to Ryan Hanley afterwards, and I put the question to him. We're out in the field, and Galway were using the dressing room inside. And put the question to him about how much does this win mean to the lads, to the squad? Having been so long coming, like been so waiting for so long, he's kind of playing it down. It's just like another win to the lads. And just as he kind of said it, the stereo came on inside in the dressing room, and that song that's on there now, it's Friday, and the boys going nuts inside the dressing room. I had a little smirk on. I said, "Yeah, it means a favour to them, all right." So it was that, but brilliant to hear it. Like, that's just brilliant to hear it. And I mean, the challenge they face next weekend, Kilkenny put up a big score on Offaly in their Leinster final, and that's what Galway face on I think it's Saturdays in Portlaoise. So nothing easy there, but it's a really, really exciting team, no question about it going forward. So yeah, if anyone hasn't seen the game Friday, I'd advise you to go back and have a look at it, and equally just to make sure you're watching and listening to them on Saturday evening when they're in the All-Ireland final, because they're a really, really promising team. And they're one of those minor teams where you really would like to see them actually go on and win it, and then obviously, please God, in 3 years' time they'll go and win another 20 All-Ireland, but they won't start that tonight.
It's with COVID, it's only 2 years now, so it's
that's right.
So but no, I'd agree with you. Just on Colin Malloy, to me, he looked looked identical to Aaron Gillen, except to the opposite side. The ball comes in, he's out in front, he has a couple of yards of space, and he just pops it over the shoulder, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it as a defender when you're marking that. But that was the quality of the ball coming in, which you already mentioned. Just on that, like, Galway have a chance to become the first county to ever win 4 All-Ireland minor titles in a row. If they do it, like in hurling, I know the Kerry footballers have done 5, but it's never been done 4 in a row. So it's a huge chance for a bit of history, and a nice one reward. Like, as our record at minor level since 2000, I think is been absolutely phenomenal. I think we've 10 All-Irelands, or we're going for 11, or it's along those lines. It's approaching double figures if it's not in them already. So yeah, best of luck to that group of team and the group of players. And sure, as you said, please God, it's about translating that into under-20 success and then into senior, because that's where we've seen the drop off in the last 2 years, which is a bit worrying. But that's a show for another day. We won't go into the depression any longer. We won't prolong it. We've been here long enough. Patrick, thanks as always for joining me. We'll leave it there. We'll be back probably next week with preview show. We'll know who we're playing by then as well, so that'll help. And sure, look, keep the bright side out. We can't be any worse anyway, I think so. If nothing else, we'll keep it with that. Things can only get better.